Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You are with Chinstrap Community. I'm Saber Ibrahim, and this is my partner and co-founder, Heather Meeker. Chinstrap Community is a resource center for people who are interested in commercial open source software, mostly entrepreneurs, developers, founders, investors, people in the university ecosystem, and anybody who feels passionately about open source software, especially commercial endeavors that are built on open source software. Today, our guest is Dr. Jason Corso. Dr. Corso is the Toyota Professor of AI in the Department of Robotics and Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. He's also the co-founder of Voxel51, a venture-backed company in the computer vision space. Voxel51 is built around an open source project called 51, which is a platform that optimizes computer vision models. He co-created 51 with one of his students, and together they founded Voxel51 when they realized the scale and scope of the challenges that their technology was addressing. Dr. Corso has been on the Michigan faculty since 2014, and he was appointed to the Toyota Endowed Professorship just last month, actually, in October. Is that right, Dr. Corso?
That is correct. Yeah, indeed.
Congratulations.
Congratulations on that. So thank you, Dr. Corso, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Saber and Heather. It's great to be here. Yeah, happy to talk about 51 and the great world of open source.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. So you initially developed 51 as an internal tool for building computer vision models. Can you talk about how and when, first of all, if you could talk about, that process of how you initially started as an internal tool and then sort of realized that it's the internal tool that's really the main opportunity. And can you talk about how and when you decided to productize it?
Absolutely. So, when Brian Moore and I, my co-founder, started talking about a company in the general computer vision space, like we didn't have an exact go-to-market in mind. We didn't know what product we wanted to do, right? Like we were kind of reacting to this, the evidence that there's significant video in the world, right? I think something like 80 to 90% of the bits that go through network routers are video bits of various forms, and my research career at the university was all about high-level video understanding, right? Like my group published some of the earliest papers on semantic video understanding. I think the first paper on video captioning. So we had this background, generally had this background on, okay, here's this video. There's value in the video. Let's try to build a business around leveraging that value and exploiting the value to build insights to customers. But as you probably hear from a lot of your community, engineers, build is going to build, right? Like engineers love to build. And sometimes you build without listening to your potential customer base beforehand. And we were cognizant of that risk. And so we really wanted to avoid that to the greatest extent possible. So initially we got started in some sense, kind of like a consulting role, right? Like we were playing with different possible go-to-markets through a grant that we had from the federal government initially, through some pilot projects with other commercial enterprises. And in each of those endeavors, our ultimate workflow was, what's the problem? What's the data that's available? How do we pull value out of that data to create a computer vision or a visual AI system? And then how do we render that down or distill that down into some actual concrete monetary value for the customer? And as we were doing this, we began to realize that we didn't want to build a consulting firm. There are plenty of them, right? So what we wanted to build was a product company. But really the common element across all those steps and all these engagements that we were having was, what was essentially that understanding how to work with your data is a critical, practical part of building a computer vision product. like in the academia and university research and even industrial research that publishes and so on, oftentimes you begin with a data set that you get off the shelf. I don't know, you just, not pip install, but like, wget some data set, right? Like pull it locally. And the work is in like the modeling, like some algorithmic work. But we quickly learned actually the work in practice is really almost all on the data, right? Like we had this mantra we used to say, kind of like, I can pull any one of a dozen models off the shelf and plug it into this problem, and the performance will depend on the data, not which of those 12 models I chose. And so that was one real kind of like learning, a light bulb moment we had by actually engaging with possible customers. One of these customers was Baltimore City Police. Actually, this was more like a friendly engagement we had with them. Some other customers in the automotive space, right? Like we were playing in a few different domains or verticals, and we kept encountering the same challenge, right? The same problem. Like figure out your data challenges first, then build your visual AI system and deploy it. And so to do that work, we began building a collection of tools. One of them was this open source library, ETA. I think it stands for Extensible Toolkit for Video Analytics. It's already available it's available on GitHub still. It actually underlies 51 still to this day. It's basically a bunch of lower level computer vision libraries that we built for that. And then we also built essentially what is now 51, which was this kind of like internal visualization slash almost like a data debugger type of a tool initially, right? Like how can we quickly not only understand the data, build an intuition around it, but compare model A versus model B versus model C on actual data examples, so we can find the corner cases, the success cases, things like that. And ultimately, I think we initially prototyped it and released it at CES. I think it was 2020, maybe something like that, roughly. As Scoop, as a different like prototype tool called Scoop. But ultimately, like releasing it or building out that tool really was a great learning experience for us, because we tied practical conversations we were having with the user base, the customer base, with our technical backgrounds, and realized that, wait a second, the real problems we need to solve or help people solve are at the data itself, right? Like generally what we learned were, from all these customers, and even when we were doing it ourselves, like most of the time people are just writing throwaway Python scripts, or just using like Windows Explorer or, Apple's Finder, just to kind of like look through their data and try to figure out like where the errors are. Like there were some tools out there like TensorBoard, right, to help you understand how your models are performing, but nothing that really gave you the insights into the data. And ultimately that really gave us conviction that segment of the tool chain was a critical gap, and we really built an exciting company around that.
So you talked about, I mean, that's really interesting that your realization of the fact that the data layer is kind of where that determines the performance and the quality of the model. And so you decided to focus your technology on that. Can you talk about the decision to open source it and kind of what you went through with respect to your internal conversations, or whether it was just a no-brainer?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, like as an academic, I mean, as a human, really, I believe in openly sharing, information and intelligence and knowledge. So it wasn't a hard decision to make. I can just start with that, right? Like, in some sense, I believe nearly everything should be open source, right? Like, fine, there's proprietary information out there, and you want to keep it, but there's so much value in the work and the delivery around what is open source that I really advocate for open sourcing everything. But in this particular case, we were building what you might think of as like the VS Code for visual machine learning, or, for like machine learning developers, right? It's like, or like, to map that analogy a little further, if you're aware of the software 1.0 versus software 2.0 mindset or analogy, right? Like software 1.0 is strictly code, and then enters the world of machine learning. Software 2.0 is the code plus the data, right? So in some sense, we believe we're building the VS Code for software 2.0 or for machine learning, right? So it generally did feel like the right and necessary thing to do to be taken seriously in the space. Open sourcing it to get it into as many hands as possible. It really just we believe that it would allow the type of viral adoption that we needed to succeed as a startup company and wanted to succeed as a startup company to do that. But even more deeply though, like part of this notion around like the importance of data and like building good computer vision models, you can I can tell you the story in a little different way than I just did for the previous question. Like like 20 some years ago when I was a grad student, people in my era, our data sets would be in the dozens or maybe hundreds of samples large, right? Like we could individually and independently analyze the one model variance impact on every single sample of the data set. Like that was part of the experimental rigor that we did. As data sets grew in size, um, it became not only less common, but almost forgotten about that it is a critical component of being an experimental machine learning scientist or machine learning developer engineer to understand at the data sample level or the data subset level how model changes or parameter changes impact performance. Almost to the point where I began to see, dozens of papers being published every year that strictly pointed to accuracy or precision or recall without actually doing any digging deeper to understand the actual nuances or failure modes of a model or an approach. And at a high level, I'm thinking like, well, these are not the best practices in the field. One really needs to get a sense for the marriage between the data and the model as he or she is building out that visual AI system. And frankly, we really open sourced it because we wanted everyone to appreciate best practices in that empirical work and to do it easily and for free. And like, so we gave it out. We really open sourced it, for that reason primarily. We really believe that it is critical to use best practices when building computer vision, all machine learning systems. And that does mean understanding how model variants are performing or not performing on different data samples and different data subsets. And that takes work and that takes tools. And we really felt like that tool 51 would be a great contribution to enable those best practices.
And at what point did you realize that the open source project that you had created could be the basis for a scalable company, or was that from the very beginning?
Yeah, Heather, it's a good question. I don't know if it was not from the very beginning. I don't think we knew exactly how we were going to commercialize this. I'm so grateful that we had investors. We already had investors at this time, right? When we were making this decision to open source it and to build it out. And they truly appreciated our conviction and our positioning around the experimental nature of the company we were building in some sense, right? Like we did not know how we were going to do it, but as as engineers, as scientists, we kept asking questions. And around the time that we were making this transition, and this I believe is the spring summer of 2020. This is the transition from like a consulting, like let's kind of build these insights, one-off customers, to 51 has potential. Let's open source it and let's build a company around this. There were actually, there were some other factors that kept popping up in conversations actually with our user base. Some of these factors were that, we were not the only company out there that was thinking about delivering AI insights from visual data as a service, right? Like you give us your data, we'll give you your business insights. And our early efforts and our competitors, it was pretty clear we were a little too early for that, like turnkey approach. And even some of the bigger Mag 7 players, like, I don't, like there were some other capabilities from major players out there that were essentially that mindset. You upload your data, we'll run our models on them, you'll get the insights. Everyone's done, everyone wins. those models just didn't work well enough at that time. This is like 5 years ago. There were the notion of foundation models, the notion of like such large data sets and such large capabilities, like, Sam Free was released recently, right? For example, a great tool from Fair, um, they just didn't exist at the time. And so we were kind of building these one-off domain-specific models, and they were hard to get right. So we were a little too early because people just weren't going from a successful pilot to production. And like the learning we had at that point was like, wait, something's not right here. So that was one element there. Another element was that, um, through these discussions, because the insights weren't there in these general off-the-shelf models, what we began to observe was that smaller companies or non-Mag 7, non-big tech companies seem to be interested in building out machine learning teams internally and hiring experts and hiring staff to go and do that domain-specific model training on their own. And so that was not, in our experience, that really was not happening. There were some consulting companies doing this, and the big tech companies, there weren't like, the Fortune 2000s or, whatever, like the Global 2000 Index, like those companies just were not really building out those teams before this time. And they were beginning to do that. And so we began to see like there's this thirst for best practices, thirst for tooling, thirst for capabilities. And so we felt like building the picks and shovels for that shift was the right approach to build a company. I think those are two big factors. And I think the third factor is one thing that I just mentioned earlier, which is that maybe we were a little early still, but the amount of visual data that was being consumed and being generated, this is 5 years ago or so, seemed to really be hitting an inflection point, right? Like this was the time when like iPhone shifted from a photo to a small video clip that's being saved. And like some other evidence was like, there was just a lot of cameras around, a lot of interest in that space. And so those three factors really gave us the conviction to push deeper on that.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that you were maybe a little ahead of the curve. And so maybe having a stage of the company that was an open source project more instead of a full-blown business gave you a little bit of leeway in order to let the business world catch up to you. Um, it seems to me like that could be something that might happen to a lot of really innovative companies.
Yeah, I mean, you can work hard, you can have a great idea, and you can do good work, and still that could be not enough, right? You have to like luck out in some ways. One of the vectors along which you really want to luck out is timing, right? Like if you are too ahead of the game, it's um or behind the game, probably if you're doing your homework, you wouldn't be behind the game. But um yeah, I mean it's a serious aspect of building a business. That was part of what we, this is, I think this, we're like 7 years into, like we first started doing this thinking and work around 2018 now, 2018. So like, we just wanted to build, we just want to build new things. Even I have old code for Voxel51 sitting on like in GitHub somewhere, private GitHub repos that are like early annotation tools, this system called Annotation Manager, Anoman, that I wrote because I thought we thought that was going to be the way to go and like build value for customers. So we hack it together quickly, get it in the hands of users, and they're like, I don't need this right now. Like, so I think building a business, building a company, I learned a huge amount, right? Like I'm an engineer, I have no business background. I actually did take business 101 or whatever in college. And I quickly, I shifted right back to computer science after that because it's like I really just really love the, like the engineering side of the game and the ideation side there. But yeah, like pouring fuel on an unproven go to market too fast is a surefire way to fail as a startup company. And I do think like open sourcing, listening to your community, building that community so you can get a lot of that input, those are critical, almost like the defense mechanisms. I'd like to be on the offensive, but really those are robustness measures. They help you build out an information flow that is super critical in building a business. And if you strictly go to, even your B2C or B2B first, and you don't have that feedback chain, that feedback loop, it's kind of like driving a car with your eyes closed. You will crash if unless you get super, super lucky. So yeah.
One of the things that's really unique about your journey and about Voxel51 is that not only is it a commercial open source software company, it's one that was spun out of a university and that has its genesis in a very prominent research university. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the tech transfer process and making sure all of the IP is squared away with the university and kind of the process of that with the University of Michigan?
Certainly, yeah. So it is something that I have many conversations about with friends and so on who are have a lot of big network and who are professors. And these days, everyone seems to be starting companies. I mean, we had a great experience, frankly. Like I couldn't be more grateful to the way the University of Michigan Tech Transfer Office kind of like welcomes entrepreneurship among both faculty and students, as far as I understand, like with open arms. Like I recently was chatting with Bryce Pills, who's one of it's not the head, then one of the heads of that uh, innovation area. And he tells me like their office really wants to be the most startup friendly tech transfer office across US universities. And our experience was very much like that, right? Like they have an inventor centered approach. And, I'll be candid, like initially I asked Bryce for a letter that said the University of Michigan owns nothing of Voxel. We are strictly starting separate out of the university. We have our own grant. We're an LLC, and we're severed. There's a wall between us. And then we got the grant. We got started. We got moving. And we didn't leverage any of the resources, just because I don't know, maybe we were, maybe the Dunning-Kruger effect was in full effect for us, right? Like we didn't really know, so we thought we could do it on our own. But during the process of building out that consulting phase, like the grant phase, and when we're initially shifting over to to be an open source startup company and take VC money and so on, we went back to the tech transfer office and we negotiated a deal to leverage all of the IP from my lab to roll it to the company. And they took a stake in the company, and they again, inventor centered, like open arms. You want to do it this way, that's fine. You want to do it that way, that's fine. And after that, we were grateful. Like we rung the bell in their monthly meeting at one point. And they've been a great help around certain marketing aspects. Actually, the Michigan Endowment invested in the company as well at one point, too, a little separate from that initial investment. And they have some very creative models to support faculty startups. Like as far as I understand, if your startup is essentially like an open source type of business, it's a very easy way to like, basically you trade 1 point of equity, 1% of equity at founding time for all of the IP in your lab. And like, it's a very easy deal, simple negotiation, and it just makes it easy for everyone, and everyone kind of wins. That's a small amount of equity, right? Like across a business. And I just think it's a great way to try to be kind of the most startup friendly tech transfer office in the US. And so I've had great experience so far. I know it's not always common, across other universities, and even probably there are some other challenges at my own, but I personally have had a great experience. Like maybe like wrap up that little bit. I think the best thing anyone can do along this vector, and probably many other vectors, is just pick up the phone and call them up and talk about your concerns and talk about your um what you want to get out of it. And I think being a little bit trusting, and maybe to use like a word like vulnerable in that moment, is probably going to take you a lot longer than trying to figure it out without talking to anyone and being cagey. I really encourage like like a strong level of trust and communication.
That's great. And as a Wolverine myself, it warms my heart to hear that about the tech transfer office at my alma mater. You touched upon the effect of the fact that Voxel51 is open source on the process. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and sort of the unique, maybe, intricacies or unique things you kind of experienced in the tech transfer process, stemming from the fact that Voxel51 is a commercial open source company and not a proprietary software company or a biotech company, which is what seems to be very common in cases of technology spinning out from universities, and how it kind of occupied this sort of niche that maybe is still a little bit uncommon in the university setting.
Yeah, I mean, you can take that question in a few different ways. I think one aspect of this is that we really we needed to create a category in the tool space, right? Like, like the first genre or first phase of customers that were providing tooling. Sorry, not customers, companies, startup companies that were providing tooling for computer vision and related spaces and so on, was all around annotation, right? It was an obvious, like, very transactional, approach to the space. That's what I now call, like, annotation 1.0, where it's kind of like, you give us your images, we'll put the boxes, or we'll get our humans to put the boxes, and we'll be done, right? Like, done. The second phase was essentially like commercialized versions of TensorBoard, like experiment tracking tools. And these were like that too is pretty transactional, right? You're training models, you have to sweep your hyperparameter space. So give you a way to basically track that problem, like very well defined, very very clear and transactional. But 51 in the space we were carving out was not so well defined, right? Like, you need to look at your data. You need to actually find the failure modes for model A versus model B in your test data set, right? Like, you need to build a gold standard evaluation data set. Those are problems that everyone knew they needed to do, but they weren't nearly as transactional. And so this category of like data-centric model building tools didn't exist in 2020 when we were open sourcing the tool. And I think the only way we could possibly have survived really as a startup company was to open source it and just to bring those capabilities and just really listen to the market. And then obviously we had the challenge of building a community around the tool. We know who knew what Voxel51 was at the time, right? Like, now we sponsored like all the badges at CVPR, so everyone who's in the community like walks around with a Voxel logo around their neck for the biggest conference in the community every week, right? So that was a big challenge initially. But even like further than that was like, how do you actually commercialize that like category of tooling that's being created as you build it, right? Like, that was a big unknown, right? So like, if we had been risk averse founders, we would have completely failed. So like, initially when we were building out the initial tool and releasing it open source in 2020, we didn't know what we were going to do, right? So we had some ideas around possible vectors of commercialization. One was, well, okay, we're going to have some machine learning insights that we can add on top of the original open source, like, the visualization, the SDK, and so on. And we will hold back the code, right? So there was the core 51 library, that was the SDK and the data model and the app. And then there was this other package called 51 Brain, which was not open sourced initially, but it was still given away for free. You can have access to it, right? So we were like, maybe we will sell that. Maybe that is the right way to go and commercialize things. Another way we were considering and running experiments for initially were like, well, 51 itself has a very tight connection, a stateful connection between the app, the web browser based visualization, and the Python session that's running it. So anything you do in the app is mirrored in the Python kernel, and anything you do in the Python kernel is mirrored in the app. And that means there's an assumption of one user, local data, and local compute. And so like that's a pretty restrictive setting in the era of SaaS, where it's, everything's multi-tenant, everything's pretty broad and team-based. So another vector was, well, why don't we commercialize cooperation in 51 and like relaxing those assumptions, and then teams can use it, kind of like the difference between whatever, like a text editor and Google Drive or Google Word, right? Google Docs, right? That was another route. A third route was, look, people are going to be using 51 to visualize their data and build their models. So how about we monetize the compute behind it, right? Like you running models against those data for various analyses and other model building things. And in the end, this is like 5-6 years after that now. What actually turned out to be the case was we are commercializing all three of them, but we staged them very conservatively, actually. So we listened to our customers. First customer came to us inbound about 10 months after we open sourced the tool. We were not doing any sales. We had no sales team, not even a marketing team. We only had a community leader. And the inbound came to us and basically said, we love your tool. We use it for our data needs, building data sets and so on a daily basis, but it's a real pain in the neck to collaborate with. And we were like, okay, that you just gave us our answer. We will go that commercialization route first. And very quickly we were able to convert it into an enterprise version and basically build a business around that. Like the first things we did were support cloud-backed data and actual collaboration, and then SSO. There are other things that are not at all, like spicy or sexy in any way, right? They were just the core enterprise software needs. And that just seemed to be the right way to go. And in fact, that also really informed us that B2B was going to be our vector rather than B2C, right? Like we still to this day don't accept like credit card swipes, although we now can accept Amazon AWS credits. That's a very recent thing after 5-6 years of not doing that. And then a couple of years later, we actually decided to open source that machine learning 51 brain subset. So we fully open sourced that as well. And then, but now in our enterprise software, we have some really exciting machine learning insight type tools that are not part of that open source 51 brain, that are really at the team level, at the scalable. 51 open source is a great tool for individual use, for early experimentation, and so on. But if you're serious about the work you do, you really need to use the commercial version, the enterprise version, because it's much more efficient. It's much more scalable. We have customers that have 5 billion samples in our enterprise version. Open source just can't support that, right? It's just not possible to go to that scale. And so we staged that one in. And now we actually have recently evolved our whole pricing scheme to move from a seat-based pricing scheme to one that is sort of like bundle-based. And we have this notion of like compute unit. And so we actually have staged in the third of our three early, inclinations of what to do. Yeah. So anyway, that's how we went from, we approached the commercial open source side of it.
So you started out, the company started out based on a NIST grant, and then it has VC backing now. Can you talk about some of the unique factors that you've had to attend to because of that mix of public and private money?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, I think there's, so we started out with the NIST grant, for which I'm super grateful, right? Like at any point when a federal program manager decides that, uh, they put out a call for proposals and then you respond to the call for proposals, in some sense, you get a grant, and a grant is a funny term because it really puts a lot of trust in the doer and the executor of the grant. But in reality, what that really means is that federal program manager decided that it would be for the social good to spend taxpayer dollars on this project. And so, it's a, people like, academics, people like me, like we really take that as a serious responsibility to use that money well. And that the ETA library I described, in fact, is a result of that NIST grant, and that was an fully open source, no commercial underpinnings whatsoever to that. And during the phase of the company, we really were able to build a good understanding of how video analytics was being used. Like, what assumptions were people making about that, both in the public sector and the private sector? Because some of the engagements we had through NIST, right? NIST was able to fund us to go do work with agencies or companies or whatever, and not have to take any money from those agencies or companies. And that really enabled us to build capabilities and solutions that were in general for the public good. And then, when we decided to shift away from being that more like consulting oriented or grant driven company into a VC company, we really took that shift seriously as well, because now right, like we build our convictions, right? We're fully open source for the core capabilities. And we believe that that is the best practices around building serious capability in visual AI. Um, but when you take private money, you're also like more the push to understand the go to market and build a business around that is also super critical, right? So like again, I said this earlier, but we're blessed with amazing um, investors who are partners at their firms who now sit on our board and really have guided us and really trusted in us. Most are past operators of startups as well, to really explore and understand the space to build the business that we wanted to build while still maintaining the open source nature of the company. There has never been an uncomfortable moment in a board meeting or a conversation with any of our investors about like, why is it open source? I don't trust you anymore. It's not, like that has never happened, because we are a collective who believes in the value of keeping it open source, especially given the earlier underpinnings that the company had from that grant.
I think you're very fortunate that you had investors that were so aligned with your mission. That's really terrific. Um, so you had mentioned about growing the community around 51. What would you have to tell new OSS founders about that? What kind of strategies did you use to grow your community and your contributor base, particularly early on?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I think our community is so valuable to Voxel51. Um, let's see. So we did one thing we did initially do was hire someone with exceptional experience in open source communities. So our community hire is a gentleman named Jimmy Guerrero, who had great experience in the Red Hat community building effort and MySQL. So like we really were like you know it was amazing to have someone with that type of experience who's willing to take the risk to join a pretty small startup company and do that with us. So some facets that we experimented with, mostly driven by Jimmy, but some that we just learned and maybe experimented with before he joined us. One is that we learned early on, or at least we basically made the assumption early on that although you may want your community to be active, making PRs and like contributing to the code base and like doing all that stuff, I think it's a little bit I don't know what the right word is, maybe not disrespectful, but like irresponsible to assume you're going to get a huge amount of contribution from anyone before your project has energy and footing, right? So like, I don't know what the exact number is, but for every 999 PRs or lines of code we wrote internally, we got one from the community. And we were so grateful whenever we got that. Whenever we got any input from community member, whether it's an issue or a line, PR or whatever, we would praise them and like send them swag and things like that. We really tried to cultivate that, but make no assumption. It is not their community's responsibility to build your product for you, even though you're giving it to them for free and they're benefiting from it, right? Like, um, what's the term with that movie? Pay it forward, I think, is the one mindset to take in open source. But some other aspects that we did, like I think it is critical to build a location out in the ether of where the community exists, right? Like we were initially on Slack, and then we shifted from Slack to Discord in the last couple of years, I think it was, and just create a friendly space that you curate and you manage and you're responsive and really answer questions and build that out. That was another big effort for us. But then one of the third trajectory I would say is that we really tried to draft behind the winners, right? Like, examples in our space were CVAT. It was a great open source annotations software tool. Didn't really have a commercial company behind it at the time. I think now there is, but at the time it was just an open source tool. A lot of people use it. It's been outmoded by other tools since then, but we basically built an integration, right? We're open source. We're a small company. We can't build the whole entire platform on day one. So we had an integration first mindset. So integrate behind the winners or with the winners, draft behind the winners, right? Like, so CVAT was one. Google Open Images was a data set that we uh, very quickly were able to write a blog about, and some of like the challenges with using the data set. And the team at Google like didn't believe us first. They reproduced our work. And then when it was correct, and then we became like the way to access that data set. Actually, we did that for a few other data sets, right? So like really trying to draft behind the winners was a good tactic for us to build the community. And I think just the fourth and final one I'll mention is that like there are other ways of building outreach. So we wrote a lot of blogs. One of our investors calls this like earned marketing, right? We've wrote a lot of blogs, a lot of recipes, a lot of tutorials, and then we actually began to do roadshows, and we would go do hackathons and organize meetups in the space across. I think we've done them globally now, actually. And we haven't. I don't know how many people are in our community. At least 10,000, if not tens of thousands, who are just in that meetup community now. It's a lot of giving out, and it costs money. It costs time. It takes away from building the core software product. Maybe perhaps it's one way to look at it, but I think it pays its dividends in the long term.
How did you go about developing for Voxel51, the commercial endeavor? How did you go about developing your revenue model and deciding upon pricing?
Yeah, and I think from a go-to-market standpoint, right, the initial lever we turned on for commercialization was going from one user to groups of users. And I think so. Basically, that gave us a natural bridge to an initial go-to-market model, which is team-based or really headcount based, right? Like take that core and notion and map it to the reality that most machine learning teams operate at like the 8 to 12 people level. So, we kind of backed into our revenue model in that way. But we had to make some other related choices that were very atypical at the time. And some of our early competitors who are now no longer around, made the other choices, and they turned out to be the wrong choices in the space. So, I would love to tell you like all these were done because we could predict the future, but some of them were coin flips and a little random. Like, for example, we were not building a multi-tenant SaaS platform. We were building a one user, local data, local compute, open source package. So the natural way to like do the MVP to turn that into a team-based tool was to sever that statefulness and then make it a single tenant deployment of the package, and bring the software to the customer rather than bring the customer and their data to the software, right? Like, so to this day, when you buy 51 Enterprise, basically we show you how to deploy the software in your cloud or in your air-gapped environment, like we sell to the U.S. government, for example. Like that decision turned out to be the right one from a who is Voxel51 standpoint and a data privacy standpoint, which is super important in contemporary machine learning industry. And we still deploy in that way, right? So that was one like really critical decision that we just made out of convenience, frankly, that turned out to be the right one. And then initially, or what, right? Like we were realizing these teams were about 8 to 12, so we basically priced it so that it would be a reasonable cost level per head count in these relatively small teams, but sold it to the whole team. And we did not disincentivize them to put their data into the software tool, right? So we were headcount based, not volumetric based. All of our competitors were volumetric. And I just thought that was a mistake, right? Like, fine, that's what maybe your VCs want you to do or whatever. You're like, in our view, the incentive needs to be to put everything into the tool, do all your work in the tool, make it as sticky as possible. But at the same time, don't clamp them in, right? Like bring the software to them, let them customize it, let them change it, let them extend it. 51 is the most flexible package out there for the space for our category that we created. And so by not disincentivizing people to put more data in, like everyone can put as much data as they want in, build as many data sets as they want in, they can run as much computation as they want in 51. What did they pay for? They pay for the seats to do that work. And so I think those were two decisions that were made. They were educated guesses, and they just turned out to lean in the right direction. I mean, nowadays, since we also not only bring you the software, we also help you set up the compute cluster that's behind the software to train models and build insights and run foundation models and so on. Since we're doing that service for you, we changed our pricing model a little bit to basically be volumetric on the amount of like value you're getting out of the tool, but it's still by and large unlimited data, unlimited usage in that way. And I think that really still has turned out to be the right answer. But frankly, it is still not multi-tenant in the sense that like it's not SaaS in that way, right? Like when you deploy it, you can interact with it as an SDK locally. Like some of our customers actually, one of our customers is one of the largest security companies in the US. They have a 51 operator that sits on a bucket in the cloud. And whenever one of their customers flags like a bad performance or a special case or whatever, that video clip gets sent into this bucket, processed by 51, and then connected into a few of their different data sets for their analysts to go and process, right? So 51 kind of started as this like deep tech, very core, like the only people who could use it at your company are like the machine learning engineers with master's plus level educations who are building these capabilities. And now we have data scientists, various analysts, like annotators, like very non-technical users who are able to also get value out of the same package because of the way it's deployed locally to their cloud and like how extensible it is to use.
So in open source, there's always a lot of pressure to add features. How do you decide where to focus your development efforts?
Yeah, I think that is one of the hardest questions for anyone who's a builder as well. Because wouldn't you just love to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week building? And we hire people like that too, right? So like, I have to say, I think our company culture, we're about 55 people now, is a really healthy one, a really good group of people. But if we disagree and we debate, it's mostly around like what we can do, right? Or what we want to build, right? So I mean, I think choosing how to invest your time and resources really depends on what your vision is, right? Like we set every year we set an annual theme, right? Like we want to make 51 easy to use. We want to make 51 the center of gravity. We want to do this or that, right? Like um I think that North Star is the first ingredient to answering the question, or effectively. And then the second North Star really is like, how are people using the tool? How are people telling you they're using the tool? How does that jive with what we think how the North Star should render it down into a product in 12 months or 18 months from now or 24 months from now. Excuse me. I think in open source, it is a little harder because you have to respect generally the social expectation is that you respect the privacy of the user. So we really do not have that much telemetry in 51. We have had in the past, like we know when it's downloaded, and we know when it's used, just like when the library is imported, for example. But we don't know when user A is using feature 1 versus feature 2, or user B is using feature 3 versus feature 4. Like we don't have that information, which is sometimes crippling, frankly. But I think again the benefits of open source outweigh the costs in that sense. But so I think we basically take the North Star, take our view of what the product is going to look like, and then distill that through a sieve that is, filters out based on what we get from our users. We do not really do, historically, we do not do services for customers. We don't have that. Like, if you pay us 2x, we'll do this, we'll promise this for you. But we are now realizing that sometimes like doing a forward deployed engineer is super critical to helping our customers find the value in the tool. So we do offer that as a possible extra, way of engaging with us. But like a critical facet before paying us money to get that is our white glove customer service, right? So for whenever you sign up, you engage in the contract with us, you get an individual who is assigned to your account, who will teach you how to use 51. Like they have weekly meetings initially, then I think they go to bi-weekly. And those meetings are insanely valuable for us. Like so customer success to engineering, core engineering, they have a weekly meeting to distill that information, and product sits in that as well. Customer success to machine learning, we have a bi-weekly engagement as well, right? Like that is the most critical value. And like, so we have these like customer success engineers who do help our users find the value out of the tool, and that pays back immediately for us as well.
And building upon that, and real quick, we have running up against our time, so we have a couple questions left. But building upon that, how do you decide which features stay open source and which features are commercially monetized and only available in the paid offering? This is a question that we get all the time from the entrepreneurs that we talk to. So we would love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear to approach that from a top-down standpoint in terms of like what is the identity one wants to build as a company, right? Like we started off this. It's a good last question to have, or near last question to have, because like it's kind of like the bookends, right? Like we started off saying that we believe that some bad practices were becoming commonly used in computer vision, model building, and data set building, and so on. So we wanted to change that and enable the community to use best practices. And to do that, we felt like the right answer was to open source that mindset and that tooling. And so, frankly, we often always just point right back to that, right? Like, is this a best practice that everyone should be using? If so, goes into the open source tool, right? Like, if it's a generally useful capability. Now, there are asterisks, right? Like the asterisks for us are around, does it require, is it a tool for enterprise security or for like other scalable engagement and so on, right? That level of like serious usage of the tool that requires a level of support, a level of engineering, like a level of expertise that is not even necessary for an individual user with local data and local compute, right? Like so that for us, that really is the decision spectrum. Now we do have some more aspects around like what machine learning capabilities go into open source or commercial. And I think really the answer continues to be, though, if the capability, it has like a state-of-the-art user experience that helps it, do things very fast at the enterprise level and so on, then we tend to keep it commercial. But if it's a core capability like computing and embedding or running a foundation model things that anyone's going to want to do as part of their open source best practices, then we keep it open source. But we tend to go back to our identity. Like, why did we open source things in the first place? Can that answer the question for us? And we generally answer it that way.
Wow, that's a really great perspective in tying it back to your identity and your genesis as a company. I really like, the take that your company has taken on that question. If you don't mind, we're gonna incorporate that in how we answer that question,
Sure.
the
Sounds good.
entrepreneurs that we talk to. Um, So we're about at the end of our time, but before we close, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, if you could tell us what's next for Voxel51 and what can we look forward to on the coming roadmap.
Absolutely. So we are going deep into two exciting areas. One is physical AI. So, early on we supported images and video. Then we added meshes and point clouds. Now we've recently added audio. But my career has been in physically grounded computer vision, and I really think there's a huge amount of potential in mobility, in robotics, in healthcare, like all tied to the physical world. So we recently released something called the Physical AI Workbench. This is in collaboration with NVIDIA. I'm super excited by that, and I really believe that is going to unlock a whole new type of user in the 51 space. And the second angle is that we were really late to not late, well, late, fine. We were really late to the annotation game. In fact, when we were first starting out, we decided to very explicitly not support any annotation in 51 whatsoever. We did not want to be confused as just another annotation company. And we succeeded. Like we are not, we supported no annotation editing, no annotation whatsoever. Because frankly, I think, even 5 years ago, we were laying the seeds in our own like understanding of the space that annotation as it was on its way out, was dying, right? Like clearly annotated data is valuable, but expecting that there will be an army of humans to give you all the annotation you need is just frankly bad, look, a bad mindset. Like it's old school. It does not make good use of what we know about it. So we are building out the future of annotation inside of 51 that will not only support human annotation, human fixing things, but also couple that with state-of-the-art auto labeling or auto annotation, and then what we call verified auto labeling, which basically builds an agent inside of the software that will interact with the expert users as minimally as possible, but just enough to get the right few shots to do the annotation needs, not only on common classes, but on corner cases. And so the next year or two are going to be a really exciting time for 51 with these two new directions.
Awesome. Dr. Corso, thank you so much for joining us. This was really great. We very much enjoyed talking with you and hearing about your journey. Thank you very much to those of you who joined us on the live recording. Please keep us, please keep your eye on our website, chinstrap.community, and on our Discord for exciting things that we have coming up. Thank you, Dr. Corso.
Thank you both. This was fantastic.
Right. Take care.